So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the CIO Gurukul 22nd CIO&Leader annual conference session on proactive threat hunting to combat ransomware in association with Microsoft. My name is Sachin Mashilkar, Executive Director, Enterprise Technology at 9.9 Group. On behalf of CIO&Leader and Microsoft, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's interaction. The purpose of this panel discussion is to provide a platform where IT leaders can discuss issues with mutual interest, share ideas, and benefit from the collective knowledge and experience. So before we begin, let me quickly introduce our eminent panelists. So we have with us Ms. Sarita Auti, Global CISO UD Trucks, Mr. Chandan Pani, CISO at Mindtree, Mr. Mathan Babu, Chief Technology Security Officer and Data Privacy Officer at Vodafone Idea India, and Mr. S. Raghunatha Reddy, Senior Vice President and Head IT at UTI Mutual Fund. And of course, from our partner side, we have Mr. Avinash Lotke. He's a APJ time zone leader at Security Solutions at Microsoft India. So thank you once again for joining us today. The topic for today's discussion, as I said, is proactive threat hunting to combat ransomware. The reason we are discussing this topic is that over the past 1.5 years, given the existences and of the pandemic, and organizations have been compelled to make numerous changes to the way they deploy, run, manage IT systems and processes. Quite naturally, this extended enterprise perimeter has become the target of malicious actors and a number of serious incidents and data breaches that have been reported. And as you know, over 300 million people are now working remotely, and users are accessing, storing data in newer ways than they were traditionally doing before. Outside of the traditional borders of businesses, with this massive growth of corporate data, exaggerated and increasingly remote working, complex regulatory needs, managing risk is essential to digital transformation. However, with the customers continuing to accelerate towards consuming more and more digital services, it becomes imperative for organizations to ensure that trust and confidence in systems and digital services is not compromised. So it's no surprise that cybersecurity leaders are under greater pressure than before to secure enterprises' assets in a digitally transforming organization, where the technology landscape spans a wide range of in-premise applications and systems, as well as cloud diversified services. What new ideas can we adopt to better protect our information assets without compromising user convenience, flexibility, and effectiveness? And how can we improve our current security posture and reduce complexity? So the proactive threat hunting is the right answer to all problems. Let's find out that. Let me kick off today's discussion by asking our illustrious panel present here with us. So I would like to start here with Mathan Babu, and then I'll go to Chandan. How do you see the proactive threat hunting is a new cybersecurity paradigm? Is it? Do you think that is what is the need of the hour?
I think in some way or other, proactive threat hunting definitely do support. I would not say that is the only answer way forward with us. Obviously, there are very specific reasons why I believe that it is also a crucial factor. Given that threat hunting in itself is to identify some of the loopholes that are available in our own IT system, the known knowns. So typically, if you look at the entire CISO vertical, the primary focus is to ensure that we defend our corporate. But for an adversary, for them, it is not to actually identify any, but one good flaw is good enough for them to penetrate into our setup. Yeah, so it's like searching for this one needle in the entire haystack for for us is very difficult, but for him to identify this one good is good enough for him to penetrate into a corporate setup. So while defenses, and there are fortification that corporates continue to do, finding this one loophole is good enough for a threat adversary. Going by that, having engaging team domestically, which also equivalently hunts for a similar kind of threat pattern is definitely going to give us an edge, right? So although my answer still remains that is not going to be the only method, but yeah, it definitely gives us an added advantage.
Yes. Chandan, you would like to react to this. How do you see an organization like Mindtree, and otherwise with your experience, do you think this is the right approach right now, and is that the need of the hour?
See, I would say threat hunting as a word, we understand differently. We always think threat hunting means actual threat hunting, right? That's what we were doing for a couple of decades now. So when antivirus used to be the only solution, we used to do threat hunting. When antivirus became the complex antivirus and anti-malware suite, we used to do threat hunting. And we thought that with that suite, probably everything was going to be taken care of. But now with EDRs of the world, XDRs of the world, we are still doing threat hunting, right? If you go back and look what is there behind the scene, right? Now, the bad actors, they have a lot more to see now, right? Your accounts are going pretty strong. Your RAS as a service is across the world now available. You pay a couple of dollars and you can avail the RAS as a service. You can take something of your own, right? Then now it is a proud factor to breach somebody and say, see, I have done this. And activists are there, they are ready to prove a point. And then finally, you have your nation state actors also, right? So this is this other side of the story where we can't see them, but they can see us, right? Look at your attack surface. Now, if you look at your attack surface, it is like ever growing, right? Start with your email, web, devices, cloud, your customer networks, partner networks, your Wi-Fi setups across the world, your IoT, IIoT, mobile devices. These are only increasing. Probably with penetration of internet, 5G technology, this is going to go up in multiple folds, right? Now, see, you need to add the operational factor to all this, your inherent vulnerabilities, AppSec related issues, 0 days, and quote unquote the patching, which is probably we are struggling from last couple of decades now, right? With all these issues in hand, threat hunting becomes very difficult, though it is just one channel for us, right? By doing that, by using that word, that yes, we are doing threat hunting, yes, we are able to do certain things, we are able to identify certain things, but we need to understand one thing: we can only hunt certain behavior, and that is evolving daily, right? If you look at for a second, if you go back and look at all the ransomware in last probably 5-6 years, though ransomware is there in the industry for almost 35 years now, right? If you go back to the first ransomware incident, you look at them, they're not canned products. They are pretty much anonymized. They are pretty much packaged for a particular customer. They try to do something very unique each time, and that is why they're so difficult to crack. And that is why we need a robust program to manage them, right, or to protect from them. Now, with that, your threat hunting is something which is unknown, known kind of stuff, right? Which you are searching in an unknown place, but you know what you want to search. But whereas your threats are unknown, you don't know what they're trying to do. You don't know who are they, right? So if you add all these descriptions together, probably threat hunting is not sufficient. But yes, it is one solution that we need to have, and we have to do it. There's no second thought that we can do away with that. That's probably my take.
Thanks, and thanks for putting that perspective. And I think I make a note of that from you and Mathan Babu, that I think it's just not the only way, and not just a sufficient approach. So therefore, and given the situation that I think you pointed out, that it's anomalized and incidental, it's evolving. We have seen the episodes even happening very newly. The actors are acting very newly in a COVID kind of scenario also, right? I think we've taken advantage of that. And I was offline talking to Sarita. I think she did talk about even the merger acquisitions kind of scenarios also are becoming very lucrative for some of these actors. So I'm going to come to that aspect also to Sarita and Mr. Reddy on that. But prior to that, I would like to take a view from you, Sarita, and Mr. Reddy later. What aspect of the proactive threat hunting are most relevant for your organization? Do you think the internal or external network you need to look at more carefully, the continuous authentication or authorization, or do you think the whole data protection framework, centralizing granular access policy, the resource segregation, or end-to-end access, visibility, and audit. Do you think these are some of the areas you would look at? Sarita, you would like to react on that?
Sorry, I was on mute. One quick thing is it's always about data, right? So how the data is flowing from system to system, that becomes very important from checking for the threat per se. That is the first point. And second point is surrounding the partner ecosystem. I think a lot of things come in from there because we don't have a control on the partner ecosystem. So these are the two aspects which I think will make, if we focus on these two things, it makes threat hunting very effective, because when we do this, we also then follow a methodical approach to monitor the network anomalies or to monitor the DNS or HTTPS. So there are multiple things we do as a checklist or standard methodology of threat hunting.
Thanks for sharing that perspective. And I think that's so. Mr. Reddy, how would you look at some of these aspects from your organization?
Yes, Sachin, good evening. Yes, so data is the critical asset organization, and then the bad actors are always trying to take hold of this data and then take you for ransom. So you need to protect your crown jewel, that is your data. So all the egress points of the data from your network, or if you your extended network, if you're on SaaS products and all. So those are the points which you should always look at for so that's one. And so there's no one solution that you should look at. So you should look at in threat hunting various methods. Those are like, say, various methods that like hypothesis based investigation. Like, say, you would look for some TTPs, which are like tactics, techniques, and procedures, or say you would look for your IOCs or IOAs, that is indicators of compromise or indicators of attacks. So you would look, and in addition to that, you would look at some advanced analytics and machine learning on your various logs that you have collected. So to identify the threat. So this is one of the defense arsenal that you have, because for you have to be always protected, whereas for an attacker, there's only one attack is enough for you to break, right? So yeah, it's a holistic approach that you should look at it.
So with that, thanks, Mr. Reddy. Thanks for making your point. And I think
I have a slightly different additional view rather than different view. If I may, Sachin, if I may add a few of those perspectives too.
Sure, I will do that, and you should continue that. Let me just prior that just introduce Samir here, who just joined us. Samir, hi, good evening. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Good evening. I'm sorry I got late by a few minutes.
Yeah, so just to get you on the page, let me give you so that we are all on the same page. Just prior you joined, we were just talking about is proactive threat hunting is the current approach, is the only approach. And I think the collective thoughts here is that that's not the only approach and a sufficient approach to combat the ransomware. I think you need a whole holistic approach. And therefore, we're trying to look at what are the sort of best practices, recommendations from the prominent CISOs, IT leaders like you can put in, which will be beneficiary for our audience, the few hundreds who are watching this live show now. So that's the context we are in, Samir, as you just joined in. So let me just continue with Mr. Mathan Babu's point of view, which he's continuing, and I'll come back to you again. Yeah, Mr. Babu, please go ahead.
Yeah, so while we heard Sarita and Mr. Reddy narrating the importance of data, there is no differential view that data is of utmost significance and critical. But if you look at in the current era that we live in, we have evolved from the conventional IT security to information security to what we are today as cyber security. Cyber security relatively in the connected world means protecting the relevant associated identity the personas, the digital personalities as what we relate back in our current world. And each of us actually today play with multiple avatars in a single organization. I'm sure all the IT leaders over here will acknowledge each of us would be representing ourselves with multi-digital personal identification when we connect into our corporate. So in the connected world, especially when it comes to threat hunting, the way I look at, while we looked at methodical approach as well to threat hunting, there is also some non-methodical or non-conventional means that also is supposed to be equally adopted in threat hunting. Why it is important is typically we look at what has happened near shores or what has happened from the news and others that we have learned about, and we try and simulate similar environment that could possibly be happening in our environment. That's one way of methodically looking at. The other way to look at it is nobody understands our IT setup as compared to the rest, right? So going by that, protecting not just the data, the digital identity also today provides a lucrative value when it comes to the attempts to hack, right? So it is not always only the data which is far more significant in the context. You can actually consider the identity also as part of your organization's data. So going by that, I do completely agree with Sarita that there will be a lookout for the data, but identity is far more crucial in the current context that we live in. That's the only additional view that I thought I would want to bring it in this flavor.
Samir, would you like to contribute on this before I move to the next chapter of this conversation? As how do you see the the country's largest private bank? And I'm not just saying just give a perspective as a HDFC Bank, but you can give it, you being one of the seasoned CISO. Is the proactive threat hunting are most relevant for your organization? What are the aspects you would look at? The aspects like internal, external, or a continuous authentication, or be the data protection and end-to-end access visibility and audit. Are some of these aspects are relevant?
Okay, I think you have taken up a lot of points in one shot. So look, there is nothing like a one solution for threat hunting or for ransomware protection. In my view today, the things have evolved to an extent. Even if you see the cloud market growing at 28-29% CAGR, in fact in India it is 5% higher than the global market, which is still at 23%. So if you see the cloud and the cloud footprints of your organizations, for example, if you set up your own instance in cloud, your footprints today is diversified. There is something on-premise, something available on cloud. There are endpoints which are again a sort of multiple channels, as simple as ATMs to mobile devices to your laptop desktops as the computing assets, to as complex as delivery focused your server infrastructure. So there is a huge sort of diversification in your digital footprints of your organization. Now managing these digital footprints with only one approach, absolutely I don't think so that's the right approach. We need to have the sort of multiple strategies. Now I come to a little bit of technical aspects. When I say multiple strategies, I'll bucket it into a very traditional, simple three buckets: protecting, detecting, and responding. Now, while we all have been focusing on your endpoints, from the ransomware attacks in terms of putting a point solution in place, today we need to understand that endpoint is not the only vector which is contributing to the ransomware, although it is a prominent vector, no doubt in that. 90% of the attack manifested in the last 5 years, endpoint is the important channel or the vector. But today, when I'm talking about in say August, September 21, and in the next say couple of years, the ecosystem of cloud, the ecosystem, the payment ecosystem rather, or the digital ecosystem of connecting the vendors to your setup, and the sort of blurrification of your perimeter, today this has also become one of the most important attack vector. When I say this, I mean that a vendor partner connecting to your infrastructure, or as simple as transferring the release management code to your infrastructure through your setup, and if there is a supply chain at his side, I think you are going to hit in a big way, and here the contributing factor would be not an endpoint, but perhaps, your central SFTP server. So this is one example. So like this, so this is the way perhaps we have to look into the ransomware, protection, which means focusing not only on endpoint, but also on the supply chain, on the vendor ecosystem, on your payment partner, digital partner, etc., etc. When I said this, point number one, point number two would be then what should be the approach? Okay, one of the important approaches, as you said, also would be, a proactive threat hunting, whereby, continuously we are hunting for the IOCs, for the signatures in our setup, which again requires, a decent types with threat intelligence service provider. So these are few mechanisms, Sachin, to handle the ransomware, as I said. Last point, perhaps, is the ransomware growing, or is the ransomware evolving? Answer is completely yes. Okay, and the major contributor being work from home and pandemic, and the couple of points what I just commented a little while. In my view, going forward, we need to have not only the a protection engine, which is as simple as the antiviruses, but also sort of EDR. And I'll go to an extent where we need to also now look into the application control, not only for endpoint, but in the form of OpSWAT and all, make sure that your supply chain is handled at the server level or basically data center level. So the point I'm trying to make in a summary, don't concentrate only on the endpoints, also concentrate on data center, because in the days to come, the data center, the cloud will become one of the most important attack vector in terms of the ransomware. That's it from my end.
That's a very interesting point you last touched, and I'm going to come to that as how the whole cloud platform security has been looked at from a ransomware. But before that, I'll go to Avinash, who's been listening very patiently, because he just prior to this session, he had a very long chat and I wanted to give him a little rest. And I'm sure I think he has patiently noted point of views coming from all five of you. And I would like to understand from Avinash that what are the best practices you are, Avinash, noticing in the APJ region, which you lead on combating the ransomware, if you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, the most important part about ransomware, once you've been hit by ransomware, is you need to, make sure your backups have been tested and work prior to even the ransomware hitting, right? And oftentimes we've seen customers who just back up data, but they're not being able to test it. And when it comes to actual recovery, that never happens, right? So that's one. Number two is, I think, when you look at the attacker, one is, of course, you want to prevent the attacker from getting in the first place, right? And as Samir was mentioning, the ransomware is evolving, right? It's in Microsoft, we call it human-operated ransomware, because it's no longer just a payload coming to the end user and encrypting his machine, but it's somebody with behind a keyboard, with hands on keyboard, coming into your system, escalating privileges, sniffing your network, going around putting backdoors and so on and so forth. So you have to be able to protect, detect, and respond across multiple layers of your organization. So whether it's your remote access, your email, endpoints, and accounts, right? So Martin, I think, mentioned earlier on, identities are super critical at this point, especially so in a perimeter-less network that we are now. So protecting identities, having privilege access strategies, multi-factor as an important aspect to it is very, very critical. A lot of customers I see, they've got an incident response plan on paper, but they've never practiced it, right? And when stuff happens and you don't know how to execute, that becomes a big, big challenge. So I would say those would be some of the best practices we'd recommend for that.
Avinash, thanks for that note. With that, I think Chandan, you want to say something. You just pointed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of things which I would like to highlight from my end. See, in my view, we need to look at certain things in a different way. Now, I think Avinash touched upon on incident response plan. Now, I would take a step ahead and say a lot of organizations do prepare the incident response plan, and they do practice it also, or they do test it also. But what happens? They miss the actual scenario. See, what happens when you prepare for something? You look at all the use case scenarios which you think is possible practically. But when something goes wrong, the scale and the impact are somewhere, right? Now, we are talking about loss of computing power completely. We are talking about a couple of lakh endpoints or 100K, 200K endpoints. We are talking about no compute available at all, right? And those are extreme scenarios, right? One end, you need to handle your media. One end, you have to handle your board. You have to handle press. You have to handle so many things, right? And don't miss the stock price also. You look at what happened in SolarWinds, right? They almost tanked, or they took a haircut of 40% on given day. So this is something from a plan point of view. We need to have the actual plan there, right? What happens on the ground, and that needs a lot of precision planning. Now, if you go back and look at the stage before that, now the entire preparation goes in one way. We call it as a unidirectional approach. Why I call it a unidirectional approach is we only tested how good we are to defend, right? Now, once somebody moves in, then what happens, right? Probably you can hold the fort for months, years together. But the day you fail, how much time the attacker needs to do the navigation, to understand your network, to do technically the lateral movement, right? How much time they need? How much time they need for privilege escalation, right? So ideally, what should happen, or what we should do is do the kill chain twice, right? So practice it once to enter, and do it once again once you enter, right? The entire cyber kill chain framework, or Maitri, probably whichever is easier for or some of us to follow, we should look at that, right? Some of the key things that we need to look at internally is how protected our identities are, right? Before reaching out to the data, the first point what every ransomware attacker or handler is going to look for is the identity, how those identities are there, right? Then also it is very important how easy to laterally propagate inside the organization, because obviously they're not going to do it as we think, right? There are multiple types of methods are there. If you look at Maitri or cyber kill chain, there are so many things are there. Some are detonators, some are listeners, some are bots, right? Some communicate in a different way. CNCs are there, and likewise there's so many things are there, and your token passing methods are there. So many things are there. So we need to understand what happens, probably how to get into your network or how to prevent that particular first phase. And if something fails, worst case scenario, right? What is my entire different set of mechanism that I have that I can defend myself, right? I can protect myself within, even if I have something internally. So these are two different aspects that we need to combine. And probably we have to look at the entire hunting also in a new way and prepare ourselves for the newest threats.
Thanks, Chandan. I think you gave a very interesting point of view on that, and I think as that strategy get better. But one of the point which even Samir did mention, and I had an offline chat with Sarita also on that. So Sarita, I'm just asking that this the colonial pipe issues we're talking about, right? The whole hybrid cloud and multi-cloud environments which are there. What are the ways and means, and one can really tackle the ransomware from that side and the data center aspect, which the vector which is going to be opening as a big threat again, which Samir was mentioning. So what are the best practices you look at there?
I think Chandan also touched upon that to some extent. I think it's all about making sure that, making sure the basics are in place, first thing. And we miss out on a lot of things. A simple thing like we just upload the configurations, we download new patches, we download fixed patches. We trust those. I think it all comes back to the zero trust which we're talking about these days. We trust everything what we would have established a trust factor once upon a time, and we don't re-verify it often. Be it access, be it the file share, be it the privileges, we don't recertify. So that is one thing. Again, we can relate. I mean, there are many mechanisms by which we can handle this. Maybe by having a good identity and access management system, or by having information protection, endpoint protection. There are n number of mechanisms. So I always classify two things. One is the mechanism, another is the core, which is getting impacted. So when I look at that, there are multiple methods to fix that. We can, I mean, all of us are in the same way because we also have a lot of our partners, and we conveniently look at SOC 2 type 2 kind of reports, and we are happy that these reports look good. But in the back end, if you really look at, there are issues which are floating around, which come through some channel like configuration movement or patch movement or even FTP, SFTP. Even through SFTP, you can have these issues coming in. And in the same context, maybe I will pull Matan also into the conversation, that merger and acquisition as a scenario, right, where everything is a chaos. We have certain configurations in place, we have certain security controls in place, certain baselines in place, and same is the case with company B, which is getting merged or acquired, but the transition period is where everything becomes fluid. And that is the most lucrative space where hackers come into picture, and proactive threat hunting may not be very impactful, actually, may not be very effective.
Right, I think Sarita, you pointed a very valid point of view. So, Madan, you would like to comment on that?
No, there are there are two additional perspective taking cue from what Samir and Avinash and others spoke. We spoke on protect, detect, and respond, right? So most often people relate back respond as the only mechanism for us to react back to a cyber event, cyber incident or so. And many organizations fail to recognize recover is different from respond. Yeah, we typically land up practicing incident response way too carefully well, which is not the same as recovering back in complete business. There are some of the firms that I have worked in my earlier past, including that with bank when I worked along with Samir in my earlier past. Recover was given a very, very crucial part as part of the cyber security strategy. And normally it is perceived that if we have to recover back in business post a large scale cyber event, the lookout is that we will come back fully in business immediately, which practically is not a method for us to accomplish. It takes longer enough for businesses to come back in the regular business post a large scale cyber event. So it is important for us to recognize that fact, and as well try and recover what is crucial. You may have actually define a method stating that I can recover back only 40% of my business in the upcoming 3 months timeline, 6 months I will look at 50%, and so on and so forth. Chandan touched upon this point as well, right? So most occasion we are bothered about the data being recovered. Avinash talked about having the effectiveness of backup, and we have the ability to recover back. We fail to recognize most occasion we may not even have the required hardware infrastructure to recover back our backup, right? So that's why recover plays a very, very crucial function. Like in systems that I spoke of earlier, we recognize that we will definitely require to have a supplementary 10 to 20% of additional infrastructure should in case business has to suffer, right? So planning to the extent of coming back comprehensively back in business is very, very crucial. That's one of the points that I thought I should definitely highlight. While we keep in mind threat hunting, it is important also to keep in the back of our mind to recover back in business. You plan the entire 9 yard. You definitely can't come back the entire 9 yard at one go. Prioritize and then help recover as what is very crucial for us to recover. That's very, very important for us.
Thanks, Matan. I think you also have given one very important touch point. I think the whole, the data harnessing, the consumer companies like you or Sameer's, doing, because data is the currency, is the oil, but it comes with this threat also. So therefore, I will again bring back Sameer here. Sameer, how you seeing some of these, the data privacy things, and how you're really managing the consumer data, and the data which is your, the sales field, which is on the there, and they collecting it. How do you make sure that is well guarded from an internal and external forces?
Right. So there is no, sort of one-stop solution for data protection. I think the way it needs to be looked into is in terms of the data life cycle, right? The way the data getting collected, whether they are your outsource agencies or whether they are your internal employees, the way, if they have the abilities to sort of store the data on their devices, if at all they use the personal devices. So the thought process start from that foundation all the way to the way the data is collected, whether it is, your internal data room, whether it is your data warehousing, how many people have access to that data, whether the access is through, backend queries or whether the access is provided through a front end, and then finally where the data is getting processed, So I think these are some of the sort of, I would not say choke points, but some of the sections in terms of the way the data's life is all about. So at each of these verticals, there are policies and a policy framework in place in terms of when the data is accessed or generated by the outsourcing vendor. So we don't allow the access to be given on the personal devices. If at all the personal devices are used, there is a sort of a containerization which is ensured, or which is rather assured by the outsourcing agencies. If it's our employees, our own licensing mechanisms has to play a role. When it comes to data room engine related activities, the data is given to only selected specific people to access the data, that too, on a backend servers, or we call it as in our parlance, the report servers. When the data gets downloaded, for the query generation part or the data processing part or for analytics purposes, the data leakage preventions and those mechanisms they comes into place. And of course, the VDI mechanisms in terms of making sure that the data doesn't get downloaded. For example, in today's situation of work from home. So I think these are some of the mechanisms to, the way we look for the data protection per se. Now, coming back to your specific query and data privacy. So data privacy is not, clearly articulated in a Data Protection Act. That is yet to be enacted from true data privacy perspective. However, Section 43 and Section 69 of Amendment IT Act 2008 does talk about the data protections and data privacy on the intermediaries like us and the banking institutions, and of course Mathan's company, the telco companies as well. So from that perspective, there is a consent architecture in place. There are data privacy elements in place. We do privacy impact assessment. We do have a privacy notice on our websites, on our important delivery channels, etc. So I think there is a hygiene in place. There is a foundation which is laid out. Probably is everything comprehensive? I don't know. Rather, the focus right now is more tactical. But I'm sure with the Data Protection Act, which will come soon, I think the more strategical journeys will be put in place, will be formulated by the institutions, including ours. But as of now, is it sufficing? Absolutely yes. There is a good amount of sensibility. There is a good amount of responsibility towards all those elements. In the days to come, we'll have to wait and watch, and then have your long-term strategies formulated towards a comprehensive data privacy or data protection.
Thanks, Sameer, for that conclusion on the at least data protection part of it. And see, therefore, while we started the conversation on the proactive, the threat hunting, and I think all of you unanimously said it's not the only way to combat ransomware, and hence we ended up discussing the various aspects of that in that process. Looking right from protecting, from a BYOD work environment, which is the whole hybrid work culture we are living right now, the data platforms, the cloud platforms, and now even Sarita touched upon on the zero trust. Now, I'm not getting into the depth of the zero trust because we will require another event for it. But I'll briefly touch upon, and I would like to bring in Avinash therefore here in it, because I think Microsoft proudly says that they are one of the first to implement the zero trust environment. So Avinash, you would like to give little note on that as how you look at the whole, while data harnessing is very important for our businesses to build the new business modules, monetize that, but it comes along with this kind of a threat environment. So how are you dealing with it, and how briefly you can touch upon on the zero trust, which Microsoft has adopted there. And then I'll take the view of Raghunath Reddy and the others as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so Microsoft's been on this zero trust journey for a long, and I would say we're not 100% there yet, right? I mean, we still have several assets that we need to protect. There are some legacy assets that we again take a risk-based call on it and mitigate the risks around having those legacy assets around. So I think from a zero trust perspective, I think it's a journey, and you need to plan the journey, right? You can't just say I'm doing zero trust tomorrow. Because there are users, there are the business could be impacted, users could be impacted. So you really need to plan and strategize and implement it in a phased manner. And eventually, over time, it will get better. It will get more mature, and that's when you will see the actual reduction of surface area of an attack, right? Because the tighter it gets over time, the more difficult it gets for the attacker to come in, right? And as I mentioned earlier on as well, right? I mean, you basically have to prevent attackers from getting in. Once they are inside, then they're basically looking at elevating their privileges, right? So you've got to have the ability to, look at, detecting that lateral movement, and when a high power user or a admin user is compromised, you need to have that ability to detect anomalies in that behavior, and that's why things like UEBA and monitoring of critical identities becomes super critical. And last but not the least, like I said, it's super critical to have backup and good backup. Martin mentioned earlier on, you had backup, but you don't have the devices to restore that backup, and that's going to be a big problem, right? So have a good backup, have a good data protection strategy as well. And look at it, holistically, right? You've got assets on-prem, you've got assets in the cloud, you may have multiple cloud strategy, and you want to have visibility of what's happening across the board, because Sachin mentioned earlier on, Samir mentioned earlier on, the cloud will be your next big egress point, right? So if you've got most of your assets in the cloud, you've got to also be able to protect and ring fence, the assets there as well. Yeah.
Thanks. With that, let me invite view of Mr. Reddy also briefly. If you can talk, Mr. Reddy, how you see zero trust also as one of the proactive measure to sort of ransomware.
Yes, Sachin. Yes, we are also on that journey. However, all the legs of the enterprise are not zero trust enabled. However, at this point of time, so when the users come in, especially from so the devices which are not owned by them, or so the networks that they are coming from are not trusted networks, or the users. So all of these are revalidated before they are provided access to the organizational resources. It's a journey. I mean, in all the areas, this need to be covered, and it is very important for organizations to move towards adopting the zero trust across all the elements of the enterprise application access and data access.
Mathan Babu and Sarita, I would like to bring in your view. Do you think zero trust models have reached to that required level of maturity, and how do you expect it to evolve? So if you could, both of you could just give your view. Mathan, you would like to go first on that?
Sure. There are two perspectives, right? So one, obviously we touched on the privacy part. I thought I will give some view around the privacy aspect as well. Largely, these are personal views of mine. At VA, we respect customer privacy. We are one of the early privacy so-called respecting organization, and we take enough due care to ensure that customer privacy is respected, while most of the businesses definitely look at monetizing information. I briefly touched upon this digital identity earlier as part of my conversation. So if you look at conventional user, keeping aside you as an employee of a corporate, as an individual, for you today, your digital identity is either your email ID or your phone number, right? So most often these are the two most common digital identity as what people can recognize you. So the mobile and the email plays a very, very significant role today in the entire privacy aspect. And apparently being a telco, we are bread and butter largely liases with the mobile number and to communicate largely with the customer email ID, right? At least for larger, well-developed organizations like financial institutes, so to date, the regulation has been largely particular on the sensitive part of the private information, sensitive private information as what people would call as, largely relating back to financial data, right? When the privacy law evolves, it will move beyond the sensitive part into other private information. So this is completely my personal view. As Indians, we are socially a vocal community, right? So we typically land up not recognizing our own private information as private, and we significantly would want to be far more intrusive when it comes to communicating or receiving information back. So when the privacy law gets enacted here in country for us, it will be a far more critical challenge, if not for corporates to recognize, but also for individuals equally for us to recognize what do I as an individual stand to gain by recognizing the privacy law. So that's one of the view that I thought I will share in this forum, Sachin. The second aspect, what you asked with regard to zero trust, relatively zero trust, given that there are net new technologies that were born very recently, some of them including virtualization, cloud, and so on and so forth. These are net new platforms that they evolved on which establishing and accomplishing a zero trust is closer to reality today, right? So these are platform new evolved technologies like Dockers, if you take it, or virtualization or cloud journey corporates have taken. It is relatively easy for us to incorporate a zero trust into that. But at least in this forum, we don't have completely a digital native or a net new born company over here. All of us are historic firms. We have evolved with baggages, and we are catching up to the net new normals that have evolved, right? So there is baggage infrastructure that we still continue to carry. So adopting and getting to accomplish a comprehensive zero trust with the historic infrastructures that we have carried, it is going to be a far long reality for us. But in the net new adoption that we have done, those are areas we can quickly recognize and realize zero trust. So with that, I will park my views and I will allow Sarita to add additionally.
Thanks, Madan.
Yes.
Not a very different view from that of yours. Just that zero trust is a concept primarily to reduce the attack surface. But what I see in reality is it doesn't happen that way, because if I have to do a network segmentation of a network, which is just lateral, which is like a flat network for last 2 decades, I need a very strong business case. Now I'm coming to the investment and cost of security, right? I'm coming to that angle. So it is not easy for us to get the approval. Okay, I need a segmentation now, or I need a multi-factor authentication. I'm not a bank, I'm a manufacturing setup. So is it really required for an automotive domain? So there are multiple things which come into picture. So primarily, I think it's all driven by cost, and getting that approved is not easy. So if that is approved, zero trust it's closer to reality. But unless that happens, it's a long-fetched dream.
With that, I would like to invite, now some final recommendations from each of you, because, the recommendations you would possibly make now also would be possibly relevant for another 6-7 months, and it's evolving, right? The whole ransomware, that's the reason it needs a continuous dialogue from leaders like you, so that, the rest of the community is educated about it. So, and therefore, I would not say give any 4 or 5 ways of combating the ransomware. I would like to recommend, have your recommendations noted here for our audience, that these are the possibly 5 or 6 big things you should look at to combat the ransomware. So, Samir, would you like to go first on that? I think Samir was lost. So, Chandan, would you like to start with that? I'll repeat some for Samir's benefit again.
Sure. I think a couple of things from my end to combat with ransomware. Have a robust incident response plan. The plan should cover your customer-related deliverables, your disclosure requirements, your client-related commitments, partners. When I say partners, you need series of partners. Your forensic partner, your partner to take care of the ransom-related issues, the recovery partner, legal implication partners, right? Both the ends who can engage with them and who can engage with you, right? Notification requirements, and most important, at times we kind of miss this, is your cyber insurance coverage, right? The kind of coverage that you have, that is most important today. Then your containment plans, additional controls that you can deploy to ensure that once something is in, how quickly you can detect and prevent, right? Basically to avoid the token passing or pass the hash or something similar like that. Recovery is one area that you need to be absolutely kind of have the plan ready, because recovery is something which I think, as Mathan also mentioned earlier, we can have the plan, but we need the means to recover also. And when ransomware happens, you don't have the means to recover it, right? Without that, it is as good as you don't have anything with you, right? And then the last part, which is very important, and which is probably the new chapter that we are all learning from different incidents, what is happening now, the media management, right? Now the articles are there everywhere in the world. What is going on, they know more than probably the agency which is actually facing the issue, right? The dark web, darknet are quite aggressive to report line by line, file by file, chat by chat. So you need aggressive planning on media management and PR, right side of communication. And finally, you need to know how to manage your board, because end of the day, your board, your CEO, and their comments are actually going to impact your stock price. And that is something which is very important for all of us, right? So these are the factors what we need to factor in, apart from our traditional, the traditional approach of creating the IR plan. So that is something we need to have it. Along with that, these are the areas that we need to cover. That's my take.
Very valid recommendation, I think, Chandan, you made, especially the whole cyber insurance coverage and managing the board. I would like to invite now. So, Samir, I think you were dropped for a few seconds. We are just taking a final round of recommendation while, we started, as I said, the conversation on a proactive approach, but the recommendations, which I'm assuming will be valid for another 6-7 months, and maybe we'll have to have such a continuous dialogues to make sure that there are proactive measures taken to combat the ransomware. So here are these recommendations I'm finally noting for our audience and listeners here. So Sarita, you would like to go next on that?
Yeah, thank you. So Chandan explained the Cso perspective. I want to take a perspective of IT, because I think they are one of the key stakeholders in maintaining the security, IT and business. So first thing I would do is make sure that they are aware of whatever we are talking. So that eases CISOs work by big amount actually, because if they are aware, if they do a certain way of, if they secure the data flow, or if they create a secure applications, if they create secure integrations, even with a SaaS platform or cloud or partner ecosystem, anything, right? That is what will at least prevent a lot of security attempts. So that is something which I will certainly put on the priority 1 list. And then I will, anyway, we have to do our job. As CISOs, we have to do our job of protecting incident response, maybe tabletop exercise or periodic penetration test. We have whole checklist in our bucket, which we need to do. But I would focus first on building that awareness and making sure that they do their job well from security standpoint. Otherwise, security will become a cost later if they don't include it in their development process or business processes initially.
Thanks, Sarita, for making that point. It should not definitely appear as a cost, and I think most conversation we hear around security, I think organizations have to change that mindset. It should not be looked at as a cost, but I think it's an absolute necessity. So with that, Reddy sir, you want to say your final recommendations? You're on a mute.
Sorry. Just nothing more to add. So I emphasize that the appropriate backups, user awareness, and finally appropriate patching for all the systems, and timely patching. I think these would be my recommendations.
Thank you. Mathan, Babu, you'd like to go next?
See, one of the, given that this is being a recommendation from protecting ourselves from ransomware, most of the thing, one of the most crucial thing that we underplay is encryption. People look at the moment encryption comes in, people look at encrypting the data. There are potential way to shy away a ransomware infection. If you have your master boot record of your system, typically ransomware hooks into your operating system layer to encrypt, right? So if there already is an encryption layer that attaches itself and you protect your boot record well, there is a possibility to evade away from ransomware infection. One of the way to look at. The second crucial way for us to look at is recovery. Most often we look at only the data part of it. Data is crucial. Most often people, when they take backup, the backup also should be encrypted. An encrypted data, if it is available, the potential, and it should not be in synchronous to what is actually in your production system. Logically, if there is a binding that is a continuous backup, typically that corporates take today, and if you have not recognized when has this ransomware hit you, you have the potential to lose your backup data as well in the same manner, because you would have encrypted your backup data as well. So it is important to recognize when this is happening to you is very, very crucial aspect to it. The third aspect that people underplay is snapshots of system. Point in time recovery, especially in backups, the technologies have evolved way too well today to potentially maintain multi levels of snapshots in highly deduped format. We underplay, most of the IT organizations underplay the need for snapshots. In the virtual world, it is far more frequently taken, but in the physical infrastructure layer, people shy away from performing snapshots very frequently. So if these three are taken into account, largely, even if there is an impact of ransomware, you have the potential ability to come back, recover back very quickly in business. While there are multiple other ways, you can negotiate as well with your ransomware person way too well. While people talked about on cyber insurance today, there are corporates which are looking at, should we have a parked fund to negotiate even with our ransomware group, and should there be a mediation function? There are agencies which does this mediation as well. Should we also sign up with a mediating functionary to mediate with the ransomware group. So while India has gone past to recognize insurance as one of that, the fourth area will evolve over the period itself is to recognize this group in some manner or other. That's some area that we will have to look out how it evolves over the period.
Thank you, Masan. So I think this recommendation of the new snapshot tools which are there now. The tech players like Microsoft, which are playing a big role in it, and I think this recommendation of mediation agency also sounds good. So, with that, let me invite a final remark from Samir.
Right. So, a couple of points. I think each one of my fellow panelists have fantastically articulated the right points. So, I don't have any incremental stuff, but 3 points, if I may say. The first point is it is extremely crucial that the InfoSec function in today's situation is no longer an isolated function. The InfoSec is all about being the thought leadership, and have the former structured engagement with the stakeholders, which means the information security team and the business continuity team of the bank and the media management team has to work completely tight manner to make sure that not only ransomware, but all such devastating cyber crisis is handled appropriately, including the media management, as Chandan very rightly said. That is the point number one. Point number two, having the playbooks, focusing around the ransomware developed and also exercised with the help of the IT disaster recovery team. Because in case of the ransomware attacks, as everybody said, the recovery aspect has to play a big role, which means the switch over from your primary DR to secondary DR, etc., is extremely important. So that, a sort of the chain, a sort of the CI/CD pipeline, if I may use a very loose word, in case of a ransomware is extremely important, which occurs, boils down to a point that there has to be a complete synergy between information security team and the stakeholders. Point number three, it is extremely important that the board of directors are well aware about the importance of ransomware, right? Because we should not be keeping the board of directors into a sort of false sense of comfort, saying that, yes, we have absolutely a good controls or we don't have any controls. It is very important to articulate where do we lie, to counter to the ransomware. On a scale of 1 to 10, are we at 5, are we at skill, or are we at 9 is very important. Because at times I've seen the people saying, sir, we are protected. There is nothing like 100% in InfoSec. And the way the ransomware is evolving, especially in this heterogeneous footprints, something on-premise, something on cloud, something at the vendor side, something with the fintechs in terms of your lending partners, etc., is extremely difficult, right? So that factual state of security is going to be extremely important, because then you don't want to be blamed or made a sacrificial lamb in case of actual crisis. So I think these are some of the few points which we must keep it in mind to handle the ransomware related issues or any other cyber disasters appropriately or reasonably well.
I think quite valid and insightful recommendations, Samir, you made. With that, let me invite Avinash, now from his solution provider hat, what are the best recommendations he can recommend to our, the CIO, CISO community who's watching this?
Sure. Thanks, Sachin. So I think one of the important parts also when a ransomware attack happens is business continuity, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about DR and recovery from an IT perspective, but how do you make sure your business is still running, and having that plan in place, working with the business folks is also super important, both from an IT as well as an operations standpoint. With that, just coming back to just the capability side of things, right? I mean, 4 key areas that we really want to focus on, right? One is, of course, secure all your internet-facing assets. Look at building credential hygiene across your entire infrastructure. Keep monitoring, for activity, right? So threat hunting is still important. You still need to do it, but obviously there are, it's just part of the process. It is not the only process. And harden the infrastructure, right? And when you look across your infrastructure, whether it's on-prem, in the cloud, it's super critical to be able to manage and have visibility of your infrastructure, and then go out and harden and monitor the hardening as well, right? Oftentimes we harden and forget, and then think that there's no configuration deviation. So going back to that is super critical. And then just a quick pitch on the Microsoft solution, right? I mean, from a zero trust perspective and protection across the multiple layers, we've got solutions that can help customers. We've got white papers that talk about human operated ransomware and how we can protect against that. And if you need to have a further deeper conversation on the Microsoft capabilities, please reach out to your Microsoft account rep, and they'll be more than happy to have a deep dive conversation with you. So Sachin, over to you.
Thank you, Avinash. Thank you for summarizing this. And with that, I would like to thank each one of you for investing your time or weekend and making this conversation really rich. I would like to conclude this conversation here and take these great new insights into how to approach the implementation of proactive threat hunting to combat ransomware in a detailed coverage through our magazine and a website. And you will see some of this appearing in a short videos on a digital also. Thank you once again from CIO&Leader, Microsoft. With you again. Goodbye. Take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you.